David, thanks so much for being with us today. I'm excited to talk with you about your new book, Apple, The First 50 Years, and even to look beyond that to get your insights on the company, where it's been, and where you think it may be going. So my first question for you, I was looking at your website at davidpogue.com. For those of you interested, go check it out. But one thing that really impressed me, and it's the breadth of your library. I mean, the topics that you cover, from Apple to opera and even digital photography. It reminds me of my father. You seem like you're a Renaissance man, a lot of different interests. So what was it that inspired you to write Apple the First 50 Years?
I mean, it's a natural topic because I've been covering Apple for 40 years, 40 of the 50 years. I wrote for Macworld magazine. I was a columnist there for 13 years, and then I became the tech columnist for the New York Times. Did that for 13 years covering Apple, and now I'm at CBS Sunday Morning, also covering Apple and technology. So the whole thing was my wife's idea. Actually,
it always is.
She woke me up in the middle of one night, literally woke me up. She goes, David, wake up. I have the best idea for a book. I'm like, what? And she's like, Apple's first 50 years. And I literally shut her down. I'm like, dude, you missed it. That's come and gone. And then in the morning, I looked it up, and she was right. It was like 2 years away. Perfect time to research and write a book. So, yeah. But you know how when you have an idea in the middle of the night, when you're half asleep, you're not really sure if it's a good idea. Mm-hmm. So I called my editor at Simon & Schuster and laid this idea on her. And she's like, oh, yeah, do that.
Well, most of the best stuff in my life has happened because of my wife, too, so I can certainly understand. Okay, this is a bit of a wide-reaching question, but after all is said and done, right, you've written this book. What's one thing that really stood out to you that you feel like people really need to know, either about the company or about leadership? What's the one thing you took away that you're like, man, people really need to know this?
I guess it's, Apple's marketing is, top-notch, and they, their whole story is we make the finest, we make the most beautiful, we really go the extra mile. And I always just thought, well, every company says that. Everybody
sure
says they strive for excellence. But man, when you peel back the curtain, Apple really does. I mean, the stories of the extra miles they go, they're just like I think my favorite one is, here, I'll give you two quick examples. When they're developing the Apple Watch, they've got these sensors on the back that can measure a very limited amount of stuff, like your blood flow and the motion of your arm. But how do they translate that into things like your stages of sleep, which is up in your brain, or your heart rate, atrial fibrillation and disease, and then hypertension, which is blood pressure? So to figure out how to correlate those data with your VO2, your blood oxygen saturation, they became the world's largest consumer of VO2 backpacks. So they bought all these oxygen measuring equipment backpacks with a face mask, and they set up fake apartments, and they got people to live, work, shop, dine, play in these fake apartments wearing this equipment to measure their actual blood oxygen saturation.
Wow.
So that they could train the AI how to correlate with so just like beyond. And the other really great story is about Face ID, unlocking the phone with your face. Mm-hmm. They wanted to make sure that it would work on every kind of face everywhere in the world. So they set up Makeup Mondays in the cafeteria at Apple, where they would have prototypes and ask people to try to unlock the thing wearing special makeup, wearing wigs, wearing weird glasses. They would take the thing to Harley Davidson rallies on the premise that they would find a lot of creative facial hair there. Sure. And they did. They would take it to twins conferences to see if twins could fool it. They hired Hollywood makeup special effects company to make these incredibly realistic 3D latex faces, masks with like actual eyes and whisker stubble and the whole thing, to make sure that you couldn't fool it with a mask. And there's like this great story of the guy in the mailroom opening this box, and there's like these decapitated heads looking back at him. But it's just, I mean, they go to ridiculous lengths.
Well, I think it shows in all of what they bring to the market. So it sounds like a company that does its homework. You noted in the book that when Steve Jobs was with the company, he cut Apple's product line from 15 to just 4, right? That quadrant strategy, I think it was. But from like an efficiency standpoint, how do you feel like that reductionist approach impacted the company's financial position during the turnaround? Because that's a big move. That's a big bet.
It is. I mean, he shut down more than that. They had 50 Macs, they had printers, they had the Newton, the handheld computer.
I remember that, yeah.
They had an advanced technology group. He shut all of it down. They had a low-end series of computers called Performas that were terrible. So he and his hardware guy, John Rubinstein, just said, we're shutting it all down. We're going from 70 products to 4. And, to answer your question, Jobs' argument was, and by the way, greatest turnaround in corporate history by a guy who'd never been to business school, did a semester of college. How did he know? I don't get it, But the cuts were not popular. Jobs' return was not universally beloved. He'd run 2 companies in his life, Apple the first time around, and then Next, the company he started after that, both failures. Yeah. So what confidence should they have that he was going to lead this company out of the doldrums? And it was bad in the 90s. Apple had all these fiefdoms, all these duplication. They had 22 different ad campaigns running. Jobs shut them all down. He said, we're going to have one ad. And it was the "Here's to the crazy ones" ad. That was it. My favorite story is there was one point where 2 Apple lawyers showed up in trademark court to sue each other. It was so dysfunctional. Oh, my goodness. The company. Anyway, so Jobs' argument was, by focusing on just 4 products, 2 laptops, 2 desktops, we can take our very top engineers and have them work on every aspect of these 4. I mean, from a financial perspective, there's this unsung hero, the CFO, this guy, Fred Anderson, who's very shy. He doesn't like the limelight. He doesn't really like to be hailed. But Apple was 6 weeks from bankruptcy when he was hired. It was on the edge. They had this run rate of $50 million a week, and they had $400 million worth of loans to Japanese banks. And so Anderson did all this ingenious, instantaneous stuff. Apple was paying its vendors, its parts suppliers, on net 30 days. So they pay these parts suppliers within 30 days when the industry standard is 60 days. Apple was being nicer than it needed to be. So he's like, okay, we're changing that. We're going to stop paying dividends. We're going to fly to Japan and talk to those bankers and explain our plan for recovery and get them to extend our loans. Just a bunch of smart, common sense thing. And that gave Jobs some breathing room for the financial stuff. And then for Jobs, it was radically cutting down the company's expenses by eliminating all these ridiculous overextended product lines and focusing on the 4. And the first new one they came up with for that quadrant was the iMac, which, again, I just don't know how Jobs does it. The iMac was so weird, right? It has no straight edges. It's transparent blue plastic, no floppy drive. First personal computer in history without a floppy. What? What are you doing? Why, if your company is on the ropes, why do you bet everything on something that's so weird and radical? And yet became the best-selling computer in the history of the world. So yeah. Jobs, love him or hate him, man, he could see the future in a freakish way.
Very, very true. And I think that is something that we still talk about it a lot to this day on the investing team, is when you see CEOs who are truly visionaries, they can see around corners like no one else. And you can't bet against them, and it's usually a good idea to bet on them. I think it's funny, you're talking about a book, Jobs operated as an unpaid interim CEO for over 2 years, and I thought that was from the ICEO, right? It's sort of the beginning of the I sort of things. But in your view, I mean, an interim CEO for over 2 years, unpaid, like, I think many people would look at that and say, well, that's a CEO who's in a position of weakness. But I wonder, do you feel like maybe that lack of a formal contract, did that give him actual leverage over the board with the company? And it seems like it might have actually given him more power.
I think it probably did. The board through that period really wanted him to be CEO. They really wanted him to take a leadership role. And he was for the first few months, he wasn't like involved at all. Like Apple had a CEO, Gil Amelio, and Jobs thought he was a bozo, and he knew that the company was in the toilet. So he took a long time to commit to even advising, and then to becoming the iCEO, and then to becoming the CEO. He wanted to make sure the company could be saved before he committed. So it wasn't his intention to make the board. It wasn't his intention to play hard to get with the board. Right. It wound up having that effect, I think, because the board kept offering him bigger and bigger stock grants and more luxurious pay packages if he would consider this job. But even if it wasn't his intention, his real goal was not to get involved until he could see what was what and know that the company was savable.
What do you think is the biggest misconception about Steve Jobs?
I have a good answer to that.
I'm waiting.
So I interviewed this guy, Andy Hertzfeld, who was one of the original Macintosh engineers. And he said, Jobs would burst into tears, or he would burst into uproarious laughter. He could rip you to shreds, or he could put you on a pedestal. He was so many different things. And what Hertzfeld says is any adjective you can use to describe a person, you could have applied to him at different times. Yeah. And so the misconception is everybody who thinks they know him. Everybody who says, oh, yeah, Jobs was an asshole. And yeah, he sometimes was. And, oh, yeah, Jobs was a godlike genius. And yeah, he sometimes was. But the totality is that he was all of these things, and he could flick from one to the other like super fast. So yeah, don't think you know Steve Jobs. It's like, the parable of the blind men and the elephant. These blind men come up to an elephant, and one of them says, I know what an elephant is. It's a thick thing like a tree trunk, because he's touching the leg. And the other guy's, no, it's like a broom, because he's holding the tail. That thing. That's what happens with Jobs.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's like when you find good businesses that do a lot of different things. A little bit of something for everyone, it sounds like he was. That's great. I love it. Let's transition right here. We moved from Steve Jobs and we're going into the Tim Cook era. And you noted in the book that Steve Jobs told Tim Cook, and I quote, "There has never been a professional transition at the CEO level in Apple. The last guy is always fired, and then somebody new comes in. I want there to be a professional CEO transition," end quote. Now, how do you feel like this planned succession impacted the company's stability going forward? Because I remember vividly when Tim took over, and all of us, we were like, oh man, is this going to work? I mean, this is a big transition, but it seems like it was executed flawlessly.
This is the mind blower, right? Like every critic, including me, like every headline was like, Tim Cook is not the guy. He is not a product guy. He's not a showman. He is not colorful or passionate like Jobs. I mean, visibly passionate anyway.
Right.
Like Jobs. I mean, he could not be more different. Jobs was volatile and loud and dominated the room. Tim Cook is calm and shy, steely, but very reserved. The man does not raise his voice. He just doesn't.
No.
And
I never heard it. Yeah.
I know, exactly. And he was a logistics guy. He was the world's greatest logistics guy, supply chain and prices and spreadsheets. But, I mean, he never would have thought of the iPod or whatever. And so I remember The Onion had a really mean headline, like, Cupertino man panics, has no ideas. Article about Tim. But once again, as you say, this was the first time that Apple had chosen a CEO not in a panic.
Yeah.
They'd had 5 of them at that point. And yet somehow Jobs knew. How did he know? He picked Tim Cook. How did he know that Cook was exactly the person for the next chapter? I mean, Cook has tripled and quadrupled the revenue, the profits, and the headcount of Apple.
Oh, it's been phenomenal. It's
unbelievable.
Been phenomenal. Yeah.
And all this from a guy they said is not a product guy. I mean, it was a professional transition. And I mean, was Jobs lucky? Or did he really just somehow know that this polar opposite man was the right CEO?
I mean, maybe it was a little bit of both there. Yeah, that's funny. You said you refer the Onion, and the Onion article that always stands out to me in regard to Apple is like, Apple is. I'm just sort of, I don't remember the exact headline, but the article was essentially, Apple working on building a new iPhone for the other hand. Right. And because everybody's glued to their phones. And, this was well before the watch came out. And lo and behold, I think they pulled it off with the watch. That is an iPhone for your other hand.
Kind of is.
But when you talk about the differences between Jobs and Cook, and I think you're absolutely right there. And so what's interesting to me, I think there's this big debate on Wall Street with investors. When it comes to innovation, I think that's probably one of the biggest criticisms from certain people today in regard to Apple is that they just aren't innovating, right? And I think you got to sort of take that with a grain of salt because, I mean, clearly they do innovate. It's one of the most innovative companies out there in my mind. But it's also predominantly a phone company still today. But what do you say to people who say that Apple has lost its ability to innovate?
Well, I think what they're saying is that they don't follow the Steve Jobs every 3-year pattern of releasing new world-busting new platforms. I mean, iMac, iPod, iPad, iPhone, like every 3 years until Jobs died.
Yeah.
Right? And that does not go on anymore. It's not that they haven't tried. There was the Vision Pro, which, I mean, that is really innovative. 5,000 patents. Yeah. On that thing. I mean, 12 cameras and, I mean, the technology is absolutely breathtaking. I mean, way too heavy and clunky and expensive, $3,500. So clearly it failed, but, they did innovate. And then there was the car. There's a chapter in this book about the Titan project. They were trying to design an electric, self-driving, beautiful living room on wheels, this Titan car with chairs that faced each other and no steering wheel and the whole thing. And they invented so much in battery technology, screen technology. The sound system was said to be like nothing you've ever heard. But it is true that they're not doing the cadence of every 3 years another brilliant hardware product. But there's an argument to be made that nobody does that anymore. Yeah. That Jobs came along at an incredible time in history with miniaturization and cheap memory and Chinese manufacturing that made possible these amazing new categories. But Cook has innovated plenty in other ways, right? He took the company into software and services. You said Apple's a primarily phone company. It's 50% a phone company. And the other 50% is these services, and then there's the Mac at 8%.
Yeah.
So that was all Cook figuring out how to, and from a profit standpoint, it's like hand over fist, right? Because there's no parts involved in offering services, but they're very popular. Apple Music has more subscribers than Spotify.
You mentioned that Vision Pro, and I went in and test drove one of those things in the Apple Store one day. Couple of years back, I guess it was. And I was just astounded. Like the technology that goes into that thing. It is literally it's magic. Now, I'm with you. Too expensive, too heavy. I didn't want to wear it too long. And it's not, I think finding the killer app, right? Finding a real use case for something like that is probably, we're not there yet. But the technology that went into that device is just astounding. I was really taken aback by it.
Yeah.
I like that you mentioned in the book the chain of pain, right? This idea that Apple identifies broken consumer experiences, like paying for things or organizing photos, then they swoop in and they change it. What current industry today do you think Apple is most likely to disrupt next using that chain of pain playbook?
I mean, this kind of steps right into the AI topic, because what Apple demonstrated in 2024, which is this new AI-driven Siri that has private guardrailed access to your messages and your email and your files. I mean, they had a woman come on stage and said, this is what it'll do. Siri, what time do I need to pick up my mom? That's all she said. And behind the scenes, in a tenth of a second, it went through her email, learned that her mom was going to come and visit for Thanksgiving, through her messages, found out her mom's flight number, went to FlightAware, looked up the flight to find out if there was a delay, looked at Google Maps to see how the traffic was, and then just said, you need to leave at 1:20. That is truly disruptive. I mean, AI is lousy in some ways. It still hallucinates. It still gets stuff wrong. But if Apple could do this, make Siri into our absolutely flawless, rock-solid AI god of our own digital domains, data domains, that would be very disruptive. That's another chain of pain. And I keep triggering what's her name on my phone. Sorry about that. Sorry, all your listeners.
No, not at all. I've been glad you brought up AI, because I'd like to wrap up today talking a little bit about, the topic that's dominating the headlines today, just AI, right? It's every day AI, AI, AI. Now, one of the things we've noticed, compared to the rest of big tech, you look at Apple's investments in AI, it's just comparatively very, very low. Like it's almost nothing. Is this a case, you think, of them wanting to be best, not first? Tim Cook says that a lot, right? We're not looking to be first. We just want to be the best. And that's worked out pretty well for them so far, by the way. But yeah. Or do you think this is a sign that maybe they're not quite sure what to do?
I mean, they definitely have a direction. They definitely know what they want to do. And by the way, I don't think they've got enough credit for the AI stuff, the generative AI stuff they put in so far. They looked at the awful parts of AI, and they very cleverly avoided it. So, for example, their AI for your writing, it can rewrite what you've written, make it more formal or more casual. It can make it more concise. It can summarize, but it will not write for you because they don't want kids cheating with AI on their homework, which 50% of them now do. They don't like the idea of deepfakes, using AI to generate pictures and videos of real people doing things and saying things that they never said. So they have this image playground app. It's generative art, but it's limited to cartoons, sort of three-dimensional cartoons. It doesn't try to make fake photos, and I admire that. In addition to the whole privacy thing, like they refuse to pass on your AI requests or the answers to anything that can be captured, studied, or reused to train new large language models. So, but to your point, there's been a lot of news about the trouble Apple's had in AI. Like that demo of what time do I pick up my mom? That was almost 2 years ago. Yeah. And that's not here yet. They're saying soon, but they've now struck a deal with Google to use its Gemini AI to power all this stuff. And they've had turnover in the executive ranks. A lot of their guys have been poached. As you say, they've invested a lot less in all those NVIDIA graphics cards. But having just written a book about Apple's first 50 years, I can tell you there was no time in Apple's history when there weren't people saying the company's lost its way, the company doesn't know what it's doing, the company's making a mistake. I mean, like Phil Schiller, who was their head of marketing for a long time, said, if we're not getting flack for screwing up, then we're not innovating and being radical enough. That was just like remember the AirPods are like, those look like Q-tips, and the iPad, it sounds like a feminine hygiene product, like everybody's dumb, always dumb, and AirPods, what, they're not connected? You're going to lose those. Those are doomed to fail. Like the common wisdom is almost always wrong.
I think that's the beauty of AirPods. I've got 2 kids that just can't take them out, but they lose them sometimes, and you got to buy another pair, right? That's sort of the genius of it. Is once you get hooked, you're hooked, and when you lose them, you immediately have to buy a new pair.
Yeah, there you go.
I appreciate what you said there about Tim Cook's focus on privacy. That's something that's always really impressed me about him and about Apple in general. Just I think that's important to a lot of people. Okay, last question. I'm going to let you go. We've talked a little bit about AI, and you talked about Siri and some of the other opportunities. But based on what you know today, what do you think Apple's biggest opportunity in AI actually is?
I think it's that idea of going beyond just ChatGPT style chatbot generative stuff and nipping and tucking its way into every corner of the iPhone, the Mac, the iPod. In other words, it's not going to be a monolithic thing. They're just going to make every little feature better and smarter. No. And the other part of it is, this thing seems to have gone under the mass media's radar, but Apple has turned into a medical instruments company in an astonishing way. I mean, the watch can alert you about this huge number of life-threatening diseases, giving you early warning of atrial fibrillation, which is the single most common heart rhythm ailment and gives 35% of those people strokes. And by the way, you can't test for atrial fibrillation in a doctor's office because it's intermittent, right? You have to be wearing something all the time for it to pick up. So hypertension, high blood pressure, they're predicting it'll diagnose 1 million people this year alone. Sleep apnea can become very dangerous. It picks up on that. It looks at your gait as you walk over time, looks for early detection of Parkinson's. And they're just getting started. They've spent a lot of investment on continuous glucose monitoring. And what's crazy is this is all on your wrist. Like, what does it know about your stages of sleep? That's up here in your brain. What does it know about the heart in your chest? It's on your wrist. It's mind-blowing stuff. And now they're starting to look at the AirPods as a medical instrument too. They've just added heart rate monitoring in your ear. And I mean, there's no telling where they could go with this stuff. I know that they have a lot of other really advanced medical projects going on with the watch and the AirPods. And AI plays a huge role in all that.
His new book, Apple, The First 50 Years, is out now, and you can get it wherever you get your books. Make sure to check out davidpogue.com. Fascinating website. David Pogue, thank you so much again for your time today. This was a real pleasure.
Thank you, Jason. I really appreciate it.